Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's meeting of the Children and Family Scrutiny Board, the first of the new municipal year. Welcome one, welcome all. I'll give everybody just a moment to take their seats, get comfy, strap yourselves in. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Councillor Dan Cohen. We will briefly, shortly introduce everybody on this scrutiny board. And as they will now, I will give everybody a brief moment to introduce their background also within children and families, to give a bit of background to people who will be taking part during the course of the day. Delighted to have been appointed as chair of the scrutiny board, and do want to just briefly kick off by thanking the previous chair, Councillor Alan Lamb, for his work on the board. One of the things that for me is hugely important about scrutiny, in fact essential about scrutiny, is its non-partisan basis, that we're here for children and families of the city. And that was something I know Councillor Lamb very much took to heart. I also want to thank previous members of the board who are no longer serving this board: Councillor Linda Richards, Councillor Hannah Bithell, Councillor Denise Reagan, Councillor Zara Hussain, Councillor Chris Howley, and Councillor Anne Forsyth. Just to remind everybody that this meeting is being webcast on the council's website, so that any interested members of the public that are unable to observe in person can still observe remote. We do, of course, have the VIP luxury seats just over to the right as well, should anybody wish to join us in person. They're delightfully comfortable, I'm assured. Less so after 4 hours. So my name is Councillor Dan Cohen. As I say, chairing today's scrutiny board. My own background in children and young families is multifaceted. I was some years ago the group lead for children and families for the Conservative group. I'm a governor of 5 different schools, one free school that's a faith school, one primary school that's a faith school voluntary aided, one specialist school, the Lighthouse, one local authority primary school, and one local authority secondary school. So I cover a fair range of schools there. I'm also the dad of 4 children, one of whom has quite profound additional needs. So a fairly wide experience of the directorate in different ways. And with that, I will invite to my left anybody to introduce themselves. And I say, if you want to avail yourself a brief moment to give us your background within children and families, you are welcome so to do, but no pressure.
Thank you. I'm Debbie Oldham and I'm from Governance Services and I'm clerk to the board.
Karen Shaw from representing Alison Robin Hoodward, and I've been on the Children's Services Scrutiny for a number of years.
Good morning, I'm Helen Bellamy and I'm a school staff representative.
Good morning, I'm Nick Tones. My background in children and families, I've been a teacher 30 years, a teacher in Leeds 21 years, which is when I just sat and worked that out, and that was quite a surprise to me that it was so long. I'm currently negotiating secretary for NESUWT Leeds Association, and I'm a co-opted non-voting member as a school staff representative.
I'm Tony Britton. I represent the Roman Catholic Diocese of Leeds. I taught for 30 years. I've been governor of 6 different schools, including 10 years on the Sixth Form College. I chaired appeals both through the Roman Catholic Diocese and things on admissions for 12 years. And I've been on this committee that long that we go back to the time when we ran museums, theatres, and including cemeteries. That was back in about 2000. So I think I makes me father of the house.
Councillor Oliver Edwards, newly elected councillor for Guiseley and Rawdon. I won't give a long overview of my background, but I currently work in education and exams. I've worked with young people both in a voluntary and a professional capacity in this country and abroad in different settings. I did also previously train as a social worker, so I've got some interest in that area. And going back much further, I was very heavily involved in youth democracy initiatives, so the UK Youth Parliament. This is going back nearly 20 years. So I'm particularly interested in work around voice of the child, making sure that we listen to the voices of young people. So this is something, just a pre-warning, this is something that I will probably be asking about quite a lot on different items. I think it's very important.
Hello, everybody. I'm Councillor Caroline Gruen. I represent the ward of Bramley and Stanningley. And I've served on this board for 10 years, with the exception of last year. So I'm delighted to be back on it again, Chair. I'm also on the Council's Corporate Parenting Board, and I'm the Children's Champion for the Inner West Community Committee area. I'm a governor in 2 schools, a primary and a secondary academy, where I'm chair. Before I retired, I had my career was in education in a variety of different roles and responsibilities. So that's me.
Hello everyone, Councillor Jordan Bowden. I represent Roundhay Ward. In regards to my background, I spent 10 years in primary education, predominantly as an interventionist focusing on phonics. I worked in mainstream and special educational needs backgrounds and alternative provisions. And I'm really happy to be back on Scrutiny.
Hello, I'm Lisa Martin. I also represent Roundhay Ward alongside Councillor Bowden. Prior to becoming a councillor, I worked in the early years service in the early 2000s as service improvement manager and help them get beacon status for their children's centres, and then help with the expansion of children's centres across Leeds, making sure that we got good or better Ofsted ratings within those settings. When children's services were brought together in the 2010, I was asked to be a performance programme manager and helped the service move from inadequate through to good and then outstanding in 2018, which we retained last year. So proud to have been part of children's services for a number of years and to work with this scrutiny board.
Good morning, Councillor Bromley, representing Horsforth and Rawdon Ward. I have 2 daughters, 14 and 5-year-old, that are at school in Horsforth, and I also homeschooled my eldest, what would have been year 6 in primary school.
Good morning. My name is Nkele Manaka, or Councillor Nkele Manaka, and I am a newly elected councillor for Bermondsey and Richmond Hill. I'm a mother of 2 girls, and my youngest being of Send. And I'm quite happy to be sitting in this scrutiny board, because I have felt as a mom, I've felt as if there's not so much done at the, as a use of everything that's been set up. You've got to be a mom and be dealing with that in the schools to actually understand the impacts and the frustrations. And it's really nice to be here and with a fresh voice. And I'm hoping to be putting some input into this. Thank you.
Good morning, Councillor Jules Heselwood, representing Wheatwood Ward. I have previously sat on Children's Scrutiny board, so I'm very pleased to be back. So hello, everybody. I've worked in education in different forms for the last 20 years, including teaching in further education. And I am also mum to 2 children, one who has additional needs. So yeah, thank you for having me again.
Sorry, Councillor Curran. I thought the other board members were going to introduce themselves first. I'm Councillor Fiona Venner. I'm the executive board member for children and adult. No, not adults anymore. Sorry, I've just had my portfolio changed. I'm the executive board member for children, social care and health partnerships. I've had the children's portfolio for 4 years, which I absolutely love. It's a privilege to be an advocate and champion for children in this city, including some of the most vulnerable children that live in Leeds. Before I was a full-time councillor, I worked in mental health services for 25 years, mainly in Leeds and mainly in crisis services with adults and children. Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Councillor Jonathan Pryor, I'm the Deputy Leader and I'm also the Executive Member for Economy, Culture and Education. I've held a couple of portfolios, but I've held schools for the past 5 years in this role. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Julie Longworth and I'm Interim Director of Children and Families. I've worked with children and families now for about 39 years. I've worked within the voluntary sector. I've worked within local authority. I've worked within private not-for-profit, and that's within education, children's social care, health, child, adolescent and mental health services. I'm mum of 2 adult children and I am nanny to 2 grandchildren as well. And really great to be here today.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Shaheen Myers. I'm Deputy Director Learning, and I have been in the mainstream education sector now and Multi-Academy Trust for over 22 years before coming into post as Deputy Director just under 2 years ago. Like Julie, I've got 2 adult children and I've got a little grandson who calls me nanny as well.
Chris Hudson, I'm a Performance Programme Manager. Apologies for the voice. I have worked in Children and Families Directorate for the last 11 years, doing data and performance reports. And outside of that, I'm Chair of Governors at a local authority primary school.
I'm Peter Sturry. I'm a head of service for performance and intelligence. I've been on the children's services journey with some colleagues here over the last 11 years. And before that was in education Leeds. Before that was in sport and recreation in Leeds.
Good morning, everybody. My name's Ben Alchin. I'm the lead for the SENSAP team, which covers our funding for inclusion services, our education, health and care assessments and plans. And we have a side of my team which looks at SEN monitoring and quality assurance as well. And before this, I've been here since January 22. I used to be in Leeds and went over to the dizzy heights of Bradford and Sheffield for a while before coming back last January. I'm very excited to be back and to be with you all today.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Dave Clark. I'm the Chief Officer for Learning Improvement. I've been in post for about 4 years now, and before I joined the local authority just before the pandemic, my background was as a primary head teacher for 15 years before joining the local authority. So good morning.
Morning, Rick Downs, councillor for Otley and Yeadon. I'm in my 20th year as a councillor, but this is my first year on Scrutiny. Been a governor of Rufford Park Primary School since it opened 18 years ago. A foundation governor at Prince Henry in Otley, and for about the same length of time. I studied primary education at Leeds Trinity about 10 years ago with the idea of potentially becoming a primary teacher, but unfortunately had to leave that due to dying. I was dead for 20 minutes and I subsequently had a triple bypass, but I'm back and back with everybody. But I was told that I shouldn't be working in education with that sort of stress levels. So there we go. I've 3 adult daughters, 5 grandsons, 1 on the way. Unfortunately, one of my grandsons is non-communicative and bedbound. And most of the rest of them unfortunately have special additional needs as well. I'm also a councillor rep on the Leeds SACRE and have been for 10 years now.
Good morning, everybody. Councillor Trish Smith, I represent Pudsey Ward. I've just been given the shadow cabinet position as member for children's safeguarding and social care. I'm a parent of an adult child, and in my previous term as a councillor, I've dealt with many of the children's needs across my ward. So I'm very happy to be here and hope to do a good job. Thank you.
Councillor Amanda Carter from Calverley and Farsley, and I'm substituting today for Councillor Ryan Stevenson. I worked extensively with children with learning difficulties and terminally ill children at Martin House. I'm a parent of a profound special needs child. I've been a governor for 20 years, a chair for 10. I sat on Safer Leeds, and on the police and crime panel I was the deputy chairman, and led on child sexual exploitation and violence against women and girls.
Morning, everyone. I'm Rob Clayton. I'm the new Scrutiny Advisor to the board.
Thank you, everybody, for that. And thank you for those introductions. What an expert board we have. Thank you all very much for that. I promise we won't do that every time. But it's there for posterity now. Let's move on to the agenda proper. Do we have any appeals against refusal of documents for inspection?
There are no appeals, Chair.
Do you have any items for exclusion?
No exempt items.
Do we have any late items of business?
There are no late items, Chair.
Do you have any declarations of interest? That looks like a no. Do we have any apologies?
Yes, Chair, we have apologies from Councillors Blackburn, Senior and Stevenson, and Councillor Amanda Carter is attending today as Councillor Stevenson's substitute. We also have apologies from co-opted member Andrew Graham. Thank you, Chair.
You may be, obviously, you've noticed that Councillor Amanda Carter is substituting for Councillor Stevenson today. Delighted to let you know that Councillor Stevenson and his wife Laura welcomed a young baby into the world yesterday. Everybody healthy and doing well. Congratulations to them all. And we look forward to welcoming Councillor Stevenson back, hopefully for the next meeting. So we will turn to item 6, minutes of the meeting of the 8th of March. We'll go through page by page. Page 7. If anybody has any issues, by the way, just call out. Don't be shy. Page 8. Page 9. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and finally 16. No corrections, nothing that anybody needs to raise on any of that. In that case, could some, yes, Councillor Renshaw.
Let me just find it there. Can I just raise an issue on page 13, please, Chair? And it's regarding the locality youth work and the life coaches. Could we have a bit more detail about that discussion that took place in the previous meeting?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thanks, Councillor Renshaw. Yes, that's something that I will address following this meeting and look to get you some additional information on, with a view to considering it as part of our work programme. Thank you, Councillor Cohen.
Okay, on that basis, can someone preferably who was at the meeting, just for sake of good form, thank you, and some second. Thank you very much. All in favour? Very good. They're approved. Okay, that moves us on to item 7. Rob.
Thank you, Chair. Scrutiny boards consider a number of standard items at the start of each municipal year, this year being no different. And the first of which is co-opted members. all boards have a opportunity to appoint co-opted members. This board has some legislative requirements as well, which I'll come on to. The standard option that's available to all boards is to have 2 co-opted members for the length of an inquiry item, or 5, which would be standing until the end of the municipal year. The legislative requirements are covered today by the 2 church representatives, one from the Roman Catholic Diocese and one from the Church of England. Andrew Graham has unfortunately sent apologies, but Tony Britton is here as part of the Roman Catholic nomination. And in addition to that, the non-voting members, which I mentioned, there are up to 5. We have the school staff representatives, Nick Tones and Helen Bellamy. And in addition to that, there are also proposals at paragraph 12, which I did refer to board members in the pre-meeting at paragraph 12, relating to 2 former co-opted members of the board who were actually parent governor representatives. So they're Jackie Ward and Kate Blacker. Should the board be in agreement with this, then they will be invited as non-voting co-opted members to the next meeting of the board in July. That would give us the 5, by the way, in total non-voting members. So we'd be up to the limit of that in terms of co-option. In addition to that, and lastly, there are 2 vacancies for a secondary and a primary parent governor. There is currently an election ongoing for the primary position, so I'd hope to update members and indeed have a new co-opted member at the next meeting. And then the secondary vacancy I'm currently writing out to all schools that qualify, which are the maintained schools, to seek a further nomination. So the recommendations I think I've broadly covered them, and that's what they are, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to query about bringing in a young person's voice. I know last year on Scrutiny Board, we discussed maybe having someone here.
Apologies, that is an omission from me just there. There is a non-voting representative from Young Lives Leeds who has sent apologies, Laura Whittaker, who's the same person from last year. Apologies, Chair.
Any other questions or comments on that item? Yes, Tony.
Not work. Oh, yeah. We're still waiting for a secondary and primary. Will that is that in addition to the 5 or what?
So we could appoint, yes, because they're under legislation, so that they're classed as separate. Yeah. As I said, there's an election for the primary one, so I'm very hopeful. There are 3 candidates. I'm very hopeful we'll have a new co-opted member for the next meeting. Secondary is a little bit more problematic, but I am working on it. We're required every 6 months to try and fill those positions, which I am doing effectively, but it's a case of finding a suitable nominee.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to ask the same question as Councillor Bromley. I was also wondering if we're going to hear some kinds of youth work perspective as well. So I was reading about the life coaches, the pathways team. Is there any scope for bringing in a youth work perspective on any of this?
Thanks, Councillor. The next item in terms of reference does note a slight change in the board's remit, which affects youth services. So some of the youth services are retained on the board, but other elements, locality youth services as they're known, are moving to the remit of another board. Now, colleagues in legal are still working on the details of that. So I will cover it in the next item, but the 2 appendices that I've published there, but depending on which aspect you wanted to look at, that would be the issue that I'd need to deal with. It's not to say no, but it's just until that's clear, it would be good to have. I'd like to have that clarity before giving you a commitment on it, so I can come back to you once that's clear. That will be dealt with later this week through the publication of the Constitution.
Thank you, Chair. Laura Whittaker, who's the Young Lives Leeds rep, is actually from a youth work background. She works at Barker, which is a youth work charity.
Thanks, Chair. Just a quick question. It says about the vacancy primary, there is an election will take place. What are the terms of that election?
So when there is more than one person who I attended a governance session, a governor's like a session for information, and that in an attempt to get people to fill the vacancy. As a result of that, 3 people came forward. So as part of that, there's an election that takes place via email, effectively, to all qualifying parent governors. So that's within maintained schools. So they will all have been contacted by the school governance services to fill that vacancy. The deadline for the election is, I think, the 23rd of June. So that process is basically going on, and effectively there's an online voting process that they all do. Yeah, secret ballot as well. Yeah.
No, that's fine. Anything further on this item? No. Okay. Are we happy to accept the recommendations? Was that yes? Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much. We could absolutely. We could do it. Everyone was in agreement. That looks good. Okay, that's great. Thank you. Move on to item 8. Terms of reference, Rob.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, as mentioned, there's a number of standard items. This is the second one, which is the Scrutiny Board terms of reference. The cover report is fairly straightforward. The details in the appendices. Appendices 1 is the standard Scrutiny Board terms of reference that apply to all the boards. Appendix 2, as I mentioned just now with the Youth Service comment to Councillor Edwards, there is an update of that going on. And I will circulate this to board members following this meeting. It's not just about that aspect. There's a few other little tweaks. I must say none of them particularly substantive, but there'll be clarity on that, and I will circulate that for accuracy to board members. And then Appendix 3 is the remit of all the boards that the council has. As noted, there's a slight tweak to the remit of this board, which is to be fully detailed in due course. I think that's it, Chair. Thank you.
Comments, questions on this item? No, I see none. So we will move on then, please, to item 9, sources of work for the Scrutiny Board.
Thank you, Chair. This is the last one of these standard items you'll probably be pleased to hear. So this presents the sources of work. So in order to determine the work programme of the board for the year, really, in effect, it allows board members to comment and try to shape the work programme, and also provides some useful sources of potential information, such as the best city ambition, amongst other things. Just to note that the Children and Young People's Plan would normally be presented here, but it is currently being refreshed. So I thought it would be counterproductive to present the old one. Once that one is refreshed, I will again circulate to board members as a point of information, and again for you to make any comments in relation to potential work programme items. I think usually there's a discussion on this item, Chair, so I'll hand back over to you.
Thank you for that, Rob. Perhaps it might be quite helpful at this stage to bring in Julie, who might want to just speak briefly about your key priorities for the coming year, things that you may want to focus on. Obviously, happy also to bring in the 2 executive members, so you can decide with pleasure who's going first and in what order. The floor is yours.
Sorry, Chair, is this suggesting future areas that the board might wish to?
Indeed, your key priorities for the year and things you may want us to try to look at. We have some ideas of our own as well.
So from my perspective, from my half of the children's portfolio, I think it'd be really helpful if the board were to look at EHCPs. I think all of us know as members, a lot of the casework we'll receive on that individually. It's been something which, as a council, we've had a huge increase in the number of EHCPs that have come through. Whether that's from changes in legislation, whether it's in how children have been through COVID, but there's certainly an increased need. It's something which we as a council, I think it would be fair to say, have had to put a lot of efforts to keep on top of. We've not always been the most successful in that, but we've put in a huge amount of work over the past few months to try and tackle that. I'm pleased to say that all EHCPs that have gone into the council are now currently in the chain, the process of delivery. I would be quite keen to bring this to the board to talk about where we are now. We've already started a lot of the work on lessons learnt to make sure we stay on top of a backlog and to ensure that we continue to stay on top of it. So I'd be quite happy to bring that to the board as soon as possible.
Thank you.
Shall I go next?
Yeah.
So obviously my side of the portfolio is social care, and we had the independent review of children's social care last year chaired by Josh McAllister, which is a really important document and likely to inform both the priorities of the current government and any future government. So it's really important that we know that document, that we are on top of what the opportunities are for Leeds. And particularly, I mean, a lot of the recommendations in that review are what we do anyway, in terms of an emphasis on prevention and early help, rather than lots of resource going into removing children and them being in care. So I think particularly around the development of the family hubs, which we're developing in Leeds and that is in line with the review, it would be really helpful if we could keep on top of the review as it's implemented and how we're working in alignment with that. Tom is on the board that oversees that review. Also, Chair, previously the Scrutiny Committee has received updates regularly on Thriving, the child poverty strategy, and also the Future in Mind strategy, which is the social and emotional mental health strategy for children and young people in Leeds. And it feels important that that continues because I would argue that poverty and mental health are probably the biggest issues affecting young people at the moment, and they're also top priorities for children and young people themselves. So in things like the work of the Youth Council and the My Health, My School survey, mental health is coming out constantly as a top issue and a major concern for children. So I'd recommend that we continue to bring regular updates on our work on child poverty and on children's social and emotional mental health to the committee through the year. Thank you, Chair.
Julie.
Thank you, Chair. I would support the proposals that have been made by Councillor Pryor and Councillor Venner. In addition, I think we've talked already this morning about the voice of children and young people. And we do have, I suppose, two aspects to our service. One is our Child Friendly Leeds team, and the other is our Voice and Influence team, who work really, really closely together. I think we're committed in the Directorate to try and have the voice of children at all of our meetings to remind us what we're about and why we get up in the morning. So I would really like to have Hannah Lamplow and perhaps some young people who contribute to that work to come and to talk to the board, not just about their work and about their voice and influence, but I think most importantly about the impact that has had. And I think it would be really great to take a "you said, we did" approach. So what have we heard from children and young people? Actually, what have we done in response? And ultimately, what difference has it made? I think in addition to that, we have a vast course of work going on at the moment, which sits underneath our delivery board. So we have a range of work streams. And this is really about ensuring that we are, I suppose, maintaining a focus on efficiency, a focus on using our resources to best effect. We have some invest to save proposals within that, but really it is ultimately about us continuing to have a culture of excellence and that culture of sort of continuous improvement, and us being able to be on the front foot responding to emerging need. And within that, we do have, responsibility as local government officers to ensuring that our budgets are in line. So I would propose that we may also want to look at the work of the delivery board and all of the work streams that sit underneath that. And ultimately, I think, the success of the directorate and of the council today has been around innovation, and that links back to listening to the voice of those with lived experience. So I would propose that the board may want to look at that.
Thank you for that. Before we move on to things brought from the board, does anybody want to comment, query, question anything that's been said so far by the director of the exec members? I have to say, not giving anything away, but we covered happily many of the things you just spoke about in our pre-meeting. So it's good that we are actually on the same page. It's always reassuring that we're starting off in footstep with lockstep with one another. Colleagues. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and apologies I didn't raise this at the pre-meeting, but something that I did raise at the last meeting was my concern that the changes to the asylum rules would impact on trafficked children. I was assured by Councillor Stevenson that those rule changes wouldn't affect children, but I now understand that since that meeting, the UN has actually warned that the UK government and its treatment of unaccompanied asylum seeking children is increasing the risk that they could be trafficked, and that this is in breach of international law. Now, this particularly jars with me, with us in Leeds, especially as those changes in law are at odds with Leeds as being a city of sanctuary. So I think that it's really important that we do look at that.
Thanks for that. I'm quite happy for a report to be brought to us on that. I think it's really important, personally. See nobody shaking their heads, which is reassuring. Yeah, we're comfortable for fine. So in the pre-meet, we covered a number of things that we talked about in terms of bringing forward into the work schedule. We talked about looking at educational healthcare plans. And looking into some depth and seeing how we can take that forward. So kind of an end-to-end approach. So I think that I'm delighted to hear that that's something that you would also like us to look at. So I think we broadly agreed we could bring that in. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Just on the HCPs, obviously we've already started quite a bit of work in kind of recovery and how we move forward and tackle this. I'd be quite happy to bring a full report of where we're up to the next meeting. I know it is in everybody's inboxes, as I said before, so I do think it is a pressing issue that we need to get on top of as quickly as possible.
Our plan was to start looking at this from the next meeting, and then scheduling some time to dive into it as well during the course of the year. So thanks for that. It's really helpful. So very well turning my microphone off, waiting for someone else to speak. Otherwise, it's me that's got to do the next bit. Councillor Green, do you want to just highlight one of the things you wanted us to discuss?
Yes, thank you. Just to restate what I brought up in the pre-meeting, I really do feel that attendance is an overriding issue across the city, particularly in the schools where I'm a governor, and I can see what enormous efforts they are making to try and recover that attendance, and it's just not responding. So although it's a very specific issue, and I absolutely take on board what Councillor Heselwood said earlier on, and you might want to just qualify that again, Jules, if you get the opportunity. But I do think we need to look at why children are not going to school, and why this has become such an issue, particularly after the lockdown period when they were without their normal routines. It's a huge issue for staff in schools, really, to come up with new ideas. And I'd like us to focus on what innovations we could perhaps reveal from best practice across the city, Chair.
Thank you for that. Apologies, I have this habit of bringing people in even though they're not indicated. Councillor Heselwood, you made some really interesting points in the pre-meet that would be quite important to have on the record, if you could. Thanks.
Yeah, at the pre-meet, I raised the issue of children who can't cope with the full school environment. So it followed on from Councillor Groon's comments about non-attendance at school, and that some of that attendance is children who can't cope with that full school environment, where you've got, particularly, I know it's primary as well, particularly secondary school, where you've got a very busy environment. And those children are not going to school because they just can't cope with that level, that social level. That very, children who are more than capable of passing their exams and of taking on the academic side of the school, but can't cope with that environment. And that's something that I've had raised on the doorstep with me, and I am on my list to do is to email Councillor Pryor actually about where parents have raised with me about setting up support groups or help for parents of children who are in that situation, and what help we can give to parents to help them with that situation, as well as those children who are really struggling with attending school, because I think it's one area that's missing within the education setting, is those children who maybe have an autism diagnosis or ADHD diagnosis. And I have a child who's just gone through that, and are really struggling to access schools, so the school environment. So I think some of that non-attendance is from children in that situation. And I think that's something that we really need to look at, but also the support that we can give to parents in that situation as well, because it can be quite isolating. So I think, I've had that raised, and that's something I think we need to work on.
Thank you so much, and apologies for just bringing you in. Councillor Carter.
Yeah, I did raise it in the pre-meet, but I think schools, particularly secondary schools, do need some support with how to cope with this. The school environment in a secondary school is, as you say, very busy. It's also quite threatening from other children, and a lot of it is to do with social media. And I just wondered if there isn't somewhere in this country, or even in the world actually, that has dealt with this issue of getting kids back into school that we can learn from. There's no point in rewriting something if somebody's done it.
Councillor Vennett, do you want to go in on that point?
Yeah, I just wanted to feedback that we had a discussion about this very issue at the Future in Mind Board yesterday. Karen Jessup was present as the principal educational psychologist, who'd be a really good person to involve when it comes here. We're going to be discussing the kind of emotionally based school refusal at Future in Mind, because it is a big emotional mental health issue at the moment. That is, as you've identified, part of the falling school attendance. Thank you.
Thanks. Councillor Bowden.
Yeah, I mentioned in the pre-meeting about the importance of art and sports in education and the impacts that it can have on in STEM, but equally I think it sort of ties in, because one of the qualifiers is normally the impact of attendance, but equally I think it's sort of, when we look at our best city ambition, we've also, talked about the emphasis and importance of partnership working, and that partnership working that we've got with Leeds Rhinos and other organisations like Opera North. And equally, when we look at the best city ambition in regards to on tackling poverty and inequality and health and well-being, it's typically those areas with levels of deprivation that they typically don't actually get to participate in sports and get that other sort of cultural benefits. So that's sort of hopefully a positive thing that we can do as Scrutiny Board and see that impact that has on them, on the children.
Thanks for that. And that's something certainly we can look to build in, as we said, within that inquiry. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. I would agree with all of the points that previous speakers have made. I think particularly thinking about the parents' perspective, also thinking about the impact of social media. I think these are really important issues. Could I also propose that we ensure that we have some young people as well as part of this? So thinking about ways that we can hear the voice of young people in this, because I think that's a very important perspective as well.
I'd upgrade important to essential. Absolutely. Helen.
Just on attendance, I know that there are behaviour hubs where schools are paired up with other schools where there's good behaviour with similar demographics. And I'm just thinking, member of my family, my cousin, she works right
on the edge of the River Mersey. They've just been Ofsteded. It's a really difficult area, fantastic attendance. So either within Leeds or in other council areas, if schools can be paired up that are struggling with attendance, for ideas that there might be some innovations that are happening that we don't know about. And then the other point I wanted to make was, I think recruitment and retention is an issue that I'd hope that we can continue with, because if you've got an EHCP but you haven't got anybody to support you in school or in a specialist situation in social care, I think it's really important that we don't lose that from a focus point of view.
Thank you for that, Councillor. Yes, thank you. Thanks, Lisa.
Yes, I raised this in the pre-meeting. Just my concern that we need reassurance at the very least in this scrutiny board that we're not losing focus on the reduction of the numbers of looked after children in the city, because they've gone up by about 100 since this time last year.
Thanks for that, Councillor Bowman. Sorry.
Yeah, it's just to sort of add to what Councillor Edwards was saying in regards to the voice of children. I know in previous meetings, I think we might have mentioned what happened in youth summits, but typically there's reports from the youth summits that we've had with our community committees. So it could actually be worth to feeding in the information that we've actually got from those youth summits, because that is there's the one that we had and was really great in regards to the questions that a lot of the children were asking of us actually, and their concerns that they had of us as a city, and especially like climate change got brought up a lot actually. So it could be an official capacity us actually doing a report on what all the community committees came back with in regards to their youth summits.
Yeah.
Councillor Carter.
Yeah, youth summits are absolutely fantastic. They're really great for getting feedback from kids. But there's also that group of kids that fall beneath the hard to reach kids that you just can't get through to. So I wonder if it isn't worth contacting youth services, because they will know lots of kids that only they know, really.
Yeah, I think there's a piece, isn't there, to make sure we really bring in the voice of the young person, and Hannah is particularly brilliant at that around the voice and influence team. Fiona, Julie, and then I'll bring in Councillor Groom.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, this can be covered if we discuss youth summits here, but we did really focus last year on bringing in children who don't traditionally attend youth summits. So we did a specific Send Youth Summit, which was absolutely amazing. I also did a democracy workshop, which Councillor Gettings helped with when he was Lord Mayor, with children from the Gypsy and Traveller community. And we are looking in this municipal year about how to continue some of that work, so that, and also for some of the youth summits, the youth service brought children to the Civic Hall as well as schools bringing them. So that meant we got children coming who might not have been picked by their schools. So we will continue that this year to get a multiplicity of voices. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie.
Yeah, I suppose it was just coming back to thinking about having that inclusive voice in terms of children and young people, and making sure that we are enabling the voice of, I suppose, different cohorts of children and young people right across the city. And that's a particular focus in terms of our voice and influence group. So the work is really representative of voices. I suppose the other thing I would say is we want our children and young people to be in education, training and employment. So there's something about the timings as well as meetings, and perhaps we might want to think about just how we enable children and young people to come to these meetings, and whether there might be some flexibility about that. Because at this time of the day, we would want those children to be in education, training and employment.
You literally stole the words from my mouth. I always get slightly anxious when I say a group of young people. Like, you should be in lessons right now. I've completely lost who was speaking next. Councillor Gruen, sorry.
I was going to say all the things that Councillor Benner has just said about including different groups of young people. The only complication about youth groups, and I totally and absolutely support including youth groups, is getting them out of school in a working day is difficult. So we'll have to think around structures and what have you. But I totally support everything. I just wanted to say also on the looked after children item, when we're scrutinising that, I sometimes feel that there perhaps isn't enough crossover between the corporate parenting board and this board. So I think we perhaps just need to think around the structure of that as well. And certainly the corporate parenting board should be aware that we're having an inquiry into the numbers of looked after children, so that both boards are equally informed about how that scrutiny is going.
Yeah, absolutely. Ben. No, it wasn't Ben, sorry.
Thanks, Councillor Cohen. I just wanted to, in terms of the attendance, and I know that seems like it's a significant issue. It's probably worth pointing out that there's a significant amount of new DfE guidance that's been produced that local authorities are now working with, looking at how they're working with schools. They're doing a lot. So our attendance teams are doing a lot of work of their working patterns, how they fit in with other teams, how they work with schools. So actually, as Councillor Venner was mentioning about the EdSite team coming to speak, the attendance teams would also be able to fit into that discussion and provide some update in terms of the national picture as well of what's the expectations around attendance. So I think that would be quite useful to fit in as well.
Thank you. Councillor Downs, I think there was something you wanted us to be looking at as well.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Well, it's actually on behalf of my ward colleague, Councillor Lay, who is requesting a scrutiny review of the impact of vaping among children and young people in Leeds. I'll just read from what he said. At our Outer Northwest Community Committee meeting on Monday, concerns were raised by all councillors of all parties. I also know that a number of other colleagues share our concerns regarding the access, availability and harm by vaping and e-cigarettes. On reflection, I also wonder whether a joint meeting with Adults, Health and Active Lifestyle Scrutiny Board, due to the as yet unknown health impacts not just on young people, but adults and therefore healthcare and public health professionals, may bring expertise to any review. Therefore, please may I formally request that the Children's and Families and Adults Health and Active Lifestyle Scrutiny Boards consider a review of the access, availability and health harms of vaping and e-cigarettes on children and young people in Leeds.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd just like to add something in regards to, so in the future, any sort of reports that we get in regards to any policy or sort of programs that we want to push for that the council are doing. In the past, there was always the voice of people implementing it, or sometimes like from Senkos. I mean, this kind of feeds into the maybe into the EHICs. But the thing that actually the voice that I never really heard about, and this is from my own experience, is the people who actually provide a lot of this, a lot of these services and the statutory obligations that we have as a council, especially to disabled children, which is the support staff, which are often the least paid staff in the school, and the overwhelming workload that's now happening, because a lot of schools are really struggling with funds. What we're seeing now actually is they might not have enough money to pay for a speech and language therapist, and so they're asking a teaching assistant to do some additional training, and now they're providing where a professional would have done that before. And I have ultimately real concerns about the workload and the extra responsibilities that basically some really underpaid staff are having to deal with at the moment. And actually it's them who provide a lot of these things that we want to see improvements of in education, and often their voice isn't included. So even like on a practical level about a program being rolled out, we don't actually hear the practicalities of how it's been implemented even in the class. So yeah, I just would like to see an emphasis of having that. Thank you.
I think there's something around that multiplicity of voice, isn't there? Just try all the stakeholders, not just the usual stakeholders, and that's something I'm picking up quite loudly. And obviously making sure we're hearing from young people and the affected young people, not just, and I don't like that, you know, the usual suspects. And I'm sure that's something we can make sure we build into the terms of reference to the various inquiries. Thank you for that. Were there any further comments on the vaping piece? I'm loath to call it that. I think it would be useful to bring that probably as a report in the first instance. Yeah. Okay. So I've tried to summarize the light workload we've just given ourselves over the course of the year. I think there's a fairly substantial piece of work around attendance, around looking at some of the drivers that may be behind the fall in attendance, how we support all the stakeholders involved within that, which of course is the schools, is young people, will be council officers who give all sorts of levels of support to schools around attendance and attendance panels, the levers that there are or aren't in many cases to actually impact that. So I think there's a fairly substantial piece of work. If anybody disagrees at any stage, by the way, please jump in. We've all said a piece of work around around EHCPs. We said it in the pre-meet, and obviously that was backed up as well by Councillor Pryor. So looking at EHCPs and where there may be where things aren't working and how they may be helped to work better. We spoke about the transformation agenda, the delivery board that Julie talked about, and a piece of work around there. We've talked about a report coming to us on vaping, around looked after children and increases and how that work may be done around that piece. Talked about the McAllister review that Julie spoke about, and then the Future in Mind strategy and the child poverty strategy as well. And I mean, thankfully, when we had some initial thoughts, most of those actually were pretty much already in mind as to how we could fit those in. So I think we're fairly comfortable that over the course of the year, all of those things can be brought in a sufficiently meaningful way that we can have some outcomes from that are meaningful. Julie, did you just want to say something? Did you? No, fine. Don't go to an auction because you're going to put. Okay. Before then we move on to the next item, is there any? Yes.
Sorry, Chair, did you mention about the changes to the asylum rules and the impact on trafficked children that you said that, yeah.
Rob was just very magnanimously goes, that was my fault. It's not your fault because I didn't write it. There. Yes, we'll make sure we bring that to us. Thank you. Thank you for that. Councillor Smith.
Apologies, Chair. I've just thought of another voice that we could do with hearing from, really. And that's a sibling of children who have additional needs within the city, because I think sometimes we do forget that there are often siblings involved as well, and the impact that those additional needs have on those siblings. So if we can kind of bear that in mind as well, please. Thank you.
So what you're saying is all my daughters get to come and speak at this panel. Sarah will be sitting in. I think when we talked about, you know, all those voices, I think there's some brain space to be given to who those voices are. I think Hannah is particularly. I'm not trying to give her more work, but it's particularly brilliant at that kind of really making sure we've got balanced voices pertinent to what we're looking at.
Apologies, Chair. I know we've mentioned looked after children, but we haven't mentioned foster children specifically. I don't think yet. So maybe we could put that. Have we mentioned foster children? Because quite often there were some meetings started towards the end of last year with some children who were in foster care.
Yeah, we'll make sure that all relevant young people are covered. I keep turning off my microphone, waiting for the chair to. Sorry. Okay. Anything else on item 9 before we move on? No, thank you everybody for that. Rob, you comfortable? We can handle that. Excellent. Thank you very much. Okay, moves us to item 10. Performance update. Julie, are you going to lead us on this? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So really this report is for the financial year 22-23. It gives a range of performance information showing the progress that we have made against the Children and Young People's Plan, and in particular the progress that we have made on the 3 obsessions. It will be the last update in relation to the current Children and Young People's Plan, because the refreshed plan, as has already been mentioned this morning, will be submitted for adoption by full council on the 12th of July. So future updates to this board will be in relation to the refreshed plan. Scrutiny will also receive the annual standards report in July, and that report will provide details and the context for the attainment outcomes across the city for the 21-22 academic year. So we'll go into more detail on that matter in the July board. So I suppose just to sort of say that essentially in terms of the recommendations, it is for the boards to discuss and comment on the updates that have been provided. And also just to note, as I've already said, that this will be the last update in relation to the Children and Young People's Plan for 2018 to 2023. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Pryor, Councillor Venner, anything from you before we? Colleagues. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Page 67, where it mentions the NEET and the not known. I don't think we've mentioned those this morning either, but they've always been a concern within the city. So I'm just wondering if anything's been done specifically to address the issue of the NEET figures and the not knowns, and what work is ongoing, if anybody can.
Please.
Very happy to come in there. Absolutely, it's an obsession. It remains an obsession for us within the city. We do have more work to do. You'll see in the reports that we currently, in terms of the children who are not in education, children in employment, and also the not knowns, you're looking, over 1,000 children, and that is of a concern to us. We're doing a lot of work. We have a 14 to 19 strategic board within the city. I've recently written out to head teachers across the city, asking for them to nominate individuals from their own individual schools or from academy trusts if an individual covers more than one school, really to ensure that we have got a broad range of attendance on that meeting. And that really is looking, I suppose, at the strategy. I think we need to have a really clear vision and strategy for this work. And I think it's time to refresh that. I have also just been in some, or I am in conversation at the moment with a view to seconding an individual into the local authority who will work for at least 2 days a week, as bringing in, I suppose, an additional strategic lead for this issue, because it is an obsession and we need to ensure that we've got sufficient capacity to drive the work. We do have a recently recruited positive destination manager, and he came to my management meeting about 3 weeks ago to update us on all the work that he is leading on, and it was impressive. One of the things that he's really focusing on, I suppose, is a partnership approach really, I suppose, to tracking and supporting young people across the city. And I think perhaps one of the things that we've not been as good as we might have been is really the role of the voluntary sector and the community sector in that work. So I suppose being really clear of the role of the local authority, but also being really clear that we've got to have a strategic partnership approach to this work. The other thing that we've talked about in the 14 to 19 group is to take an OBA approach. So one of the things that brought me to Leeds was that approach, that outcome-based accountability approach, and really asking those, fundamental, simple questions, which is, what are we doing? How much are we doing? And ultimately, is anybody better off? And I think within that, I think it's really important that, I suppose, our data is really driving this work, so that we're really clear about, I suppose, the pathways for young people, and especially, I say that 14 to 19 pathway. We talked about life coaches already in this meeting. Our life coaches have got a really specific role to play, in this area, in this agenda, essentially. And it is about building those trusting relationships with these young people. I'll probably stop there, but I'm very happy to answer any questions. But suffice to say, there's an awful lot of work going on in this area. And I think that for me, one of the more positive developments recently is that acknowledgement across the broader partnership. And as I've said in the 14 to 19 group, that we need that partnership approach.
So Councillor Carter, then Councillor Renshaw, then Councillor Smith.
This particular group of people is particularly vital that we get them into some kind of education, because, and I have raised this under the Safer Leeds hat, because we know from evidence that if these kids don't get an education, their only opportunity after school is then to turn to criminality. And you can't get them out of that, then it's prison, and then it's just a cycle. And those kids are lost. We have to get those kids back.
Thank you, Councillor Renshaw.
Thank you, Chair. One thing I'm pleased about this morning is the fact that figures are there and not just a percentage, because when you look at the percentage, it makes people think that there are not many children within our city that are not in education, employment or training. I'm just wondering how we actually, once they've gone and they are missing, are they being found within other authorities? Are they being identified within this city? And if so, what are they actually doing, or where have they taken themselves and for what purpose? Because there's a lot of mental health issues within young people, and they get very, very down. And we know of lots of tragic events. But I just wondered what work was being done to actually engage with the not in education, employment or training.
Yeah, I think, I suppose, as I was saying before, that real focus on data, and I suppose being data driven and having that evidence base is key. And again, that's what we are working on across the partnership. Our Pathways team is absolutely instrumental, as I've already said, in terms of tracking those children and young people. And just as you're saying, Councillor Renshaw, just being, understanding the barriers for them, at times in terms of education, training, employment. And going back to Councillor Carter's point, I suppose, having that data approach and that data-driven approach, just really understanding, what does the makeup of this group look like? So thinking about disproportionality in terms of, as an example, Gypsy Roma traveller children, thinking about disproportionality in terms of Black, Asian, minority, ethnic children. We're having a real focus. I chair the Youth Justice Partnership Board, and again, really thinking about those children on the edge of youth justice services, or the children involved with the youth justice service, and actually the disproportionality of those children who are not in education, training and employment. But really, for me, it goes back to early intervention and prevention, and actually how are we engaging those children? It's some of the conversations that we've already had around, enabling those children to be in a school environment and, enabling a curriculum that can respond to their needs, enabling, our fantastic education colleagues across the city to have the support, to be able to meet a range of what are really, really complex needs at the moment. And I think the other thing is the voice of children and young people, actually, and again, we've done a lot of work on that in terms of the Youth Justice Partnership Board, but in our other work, about what's the difference as they see it, that would make a difference for them. So an awful lot of work going on, but I think, I think ultimately it is about building those trusting relationships with children so that they can, express their own experience of education and training and employment and what would make the difference for them.
Do you want to come back on that point? So, yeah.
Yeah, there has been some work done on this, and the group that are affected predominantly by this are white boys from poor backgrounds, massively. And those are the group that I think we should be targeting. And it's not just mental health. There's all kinds of reasons why they're not engaging. For instance, the school system, as it is, it suits girls better than boys, and that's just the way it is. So it's harder for boys to learn, but that is the group that we should really, really focus on.
Thank you, Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Some very interesting points, and I can't disagree with any of them, to be honest, but there's a couple of comments I'd like to make. So firstly, I mean, a positive destination manager. I mean, what even is that? If we want to reach people, then we need to make sure that people understand what it is that we're trying to achieve and how it is that we're trying to help them. So I think we need to be clearer and use less jargon, some plain English. We're switching people off, and obviously we don't want to switch people off. We want to bring them back in. The numbers, 10.42% of our young people effectively lost, missing. We need to re-engage with them, and we're not going to do that if we don't, speak on their level almost. The 14 to 19 pathway, absolutely great, far too late. If you can catch them there, you haven't got them there. That's something I regularly say. I've said it in Scrutiny time and again. And I think the early intervention is the key. And as Councillor Carter says, we can't pigeonhole people anymore. It's an across the board piece, and we need to look at everybody and treat everybody as an individual, and take the divisions away. Thank you.
No, that's really helpful. Thank you very much for your comments, Councillor Smith. And we do slip into jargon, and it's always helpful to be reminded. So thank you very much for that. I think in terms of the early intervention and prevention being key, again, I would completely agree. And that's why we've got a real focus through our children's centres, but also our work with early years providers right across the city. The work that we've entered into with Nesta, really we had a discovery phase with Nesta, which was really looking about, we talk about how to reach children, how to reach families. We need to flip that, because actually this is about our failure to engage. This is about, us having to do better, to do differently, to ensure that our services are accessible for all children and all families in the city. So we've done a lot of work, again, voice and influencing, in terms of hearing the voice and influence of children and families, of smaller children within local communities, about actually, why is it that they're not accessing their local children's centre, as an example? Why is it that they're not accessing the early years providers? What would make a difference? Because you're absolutely right. We need to be engaging our children and families at the earliest opportunity. I think the other thing with that, I would say, is, and it links really to the sort of conversations around, those children with special educational needs and disability, which is timely identification of potential challenges that children may have. And again, the earlier that we can do that, if you think about neurodiversity, if you think about speech and language, the better that we're going to be able to respond to their needs and keep them within education, training and employment. So that focus on best start and focus on early years, again, is a real priority for us.
Thanks, Councillor Hasselwood.
I'd just like to disagree with the comment that those that people in this group are effectively lost or missing, because I have a question. A young person I know about at the moment, and a couple of years ago, I knew someone in the same situation where they're in year 12. They've realised that doing their A levels is not the right thing for them, and they've made arrangements to do a different course starting in September. So at the moment, they aren't in any of the categories that we're talking about, but they're not lost or missing. They are, they've decided that pathway wasn't right for them, and through discussions with parents and different education providers, have decided to move course and start something else in the September. So I'm interested to know how we track those people, because they're not lost or missing. They are just decided to take a different pathway. And I think how education is set up these days, it's not about going from school to A levels to university at 18. We have lots of different options, and we can do that at different times in our lives now. So I'd like to know how we can track those people, because obviously they're in there, but we know they're not lost or missing.
Look, Councillor Hazelwood, you're absolutely right. And this again has been a focus of the partnership work that we're doing. So as an example, we have, children who live in Leeds but attend school in other local authorities. That requires us, we have different information systems, capturing information at different times, so there's a lot of work, as I've said, being done around the strategic partnership in Leeds, but also linking in other local authorities. And that's why I suppose I wanted to really focus on having that data-driven, evidence-based approach, because actually there's a story behind those figures, and not known does not actually always mean not known. It might just be that we don't have that information to hand. So that's where a key focus at the moment, as I've already said, is that outcome-based accountability approach, and us really ensuring that we've got that tracking and we've got the sharing of information as effective as we possibly can. A city the size of Leeds, as you can imagine, and again, the issues that I've talked about in terms of boundaries, it's a big task, but I think we've got a real momentum behind this now. It is an obsession, and I think bringing that additional capacity in, from the school sector, the education sector in Leeds, and again that fresh pair of eyes coming into the local authority to help us and to give us perhaps a new perspective, I think will be really, really helpful.
Councillor Bromley.
Yes, I just wanted to go back to the point Julie's mentioning on curriculum and supporting staff members with the education model. Also looking worldwide to see how other countries might do. I mentioned last year Nordic countries having education models that are very based on well-being, and then actually their outcome for attendance and general performance overall makes for better results. So therefore, can we look at our outcomes being surrounding wording and objectives that are similar to those? And even though the government, the education model is central government orientated, do we have any influence over that locally? So can we support universities to do studies in our local schools? And how might we be able to listen to voices of that and bring about any kind of change?
No, absolutely. Colleagues around the table, we've been meeting, as I've said, with head teachers, Senkos, a vast number over the last few months. And actually when I'm in those meetings and I'm listening to peers, my peers across the city in education, telling us that actually the conversation in the staff room in primary school is not about the curriculum or teaching. The conversation in the staff room is actually, where do you get the most effective bite guards, because of the level of complexity that they're dealing with in terms of children's needs. We've got to think differently. And I think a key part of the journey in Leeds and before my time has been about looking out and looking actually to where is that best practice and where can we learn, how can we learn from others. So following on from the conversations that we've had with head teachers in the city, we are setting up, and we had one yesterday actually, a number of roundtable events and they may well lead to sort of task and finish groups, but it's got to be, how can I put it, task and finish groups, again, where we can evidence an impact, and focusing our attention on some of our key challenges, one of which is as you've described. So I think, again, absolutely, we need to be thinking differently, and we need to be engaging, with our education colleagues in the city, a whole system approach.
Thank you. Tony.
Looking at the figures, it was 719 young people recorded. It's dead easy to just look at a figure, 719 straight away, but each one of those is a young person. And each one of those is lost or potentially lost. And I think that really it goes back to a thing we were discussing earlier. I think you can predict probably as far back as primary schools, those people who will in actual fact become NEET. And I think that's where we need to concentrate the work. Not on when it's come to the end, but when the beginning, get it at the roots.
Yeah, Councillor Pratt.
I think it's really important when we look at that overall figure for NEET and not known, understand that that's not 719, was it, children who are in a difficult place. A lot of those not known, they'll be in a perfectly good place. When I was younger, I moved from one education establishment to another. So for a short period, I would have fallen in the NEET category. It didn't mean I was suddenly on a path to criminality. It meant I was just moving from one establishment to another. And I think that's the point that Julie's making about being really clear in the data, what sits behind those figures. So yes, those 719 children are ones we want to look out to find out what they're doing. But that doesn't mean that all of those children are going to need a significant amount of help. I think one thing that has made this difficult, it was, I think it was about 10 or 11 years ago when the government abolished the Connections service, which I think was a fantastic way of helping young people into careers. It was a fantastic way of monitoring where children and young people were and making sure they were on those right tracks. It has been made a lot more difficult in the period since then. And what we're seeing is 10 years later, without that specific service on careers, the negative impact of that. So we do have a harder job now, but I think Julie's absolutely right that we need to be data driven rather than just kind of saying these 700 children are in difficulty. We actually need to work out exactly which ones need what level of support. Some will just need a little nudge in the right direction. Other more complex cases are going to need a lot more. Some of them it's just going to be a temporary between different establishments. And I think that's what we really need to be clear on looking at the data.
It's accurate to say, though, isn't it, Councillor Pryor, that it's gone up by nearly 218 young people. So comparative to last year, using the same data, using the same metrics, it's gone up quite significantly. So are we right to be concerned by that? Or are you saying we don't need to be concerned by that?
I think it's an obsession. So, we are obsessing on this issue because, to be honest with you, and again, it comes back to, as we've already said, in terms of understanding the data and understanding the individual circumstances for each of those children. There'll be some children that we ought to be concerned about in that cohort, and they are the children that need our support. There'll be other children, as Councillor Pryor has said, who actually have moved. They are in education and employment, but we've not managed to get that information. I think the other thing for me, perhaps just to highlight, is our growing population as well of adolescents, and in the city, and the fact that that will impact on our numbers. The other thing I think is around the increase in children who are being electively home educated, actually. And again, for me, having that data-driven approach and understanding the cohort, there's a real importance for us to be aware of that cohort of children as well.
Councillor Gruen.
Well, I hope this doesn't sound too rambling, but it was really a reflection on Julie's comments about engaging with young people and the way in which we engage with young people. And I think sometimes, I think there's room for a lot of thinking within school environments about the way we engage with young people. And one example that sprang to mind when you were speaking is that I was going through some attendance details about getting people to attend exams at Leeds West Academy. And one young person's name came up, and I couldn't believe the description I was given of his behaviour and attitude in school, because I was told he found authority difficult to deal with. He could be really stubborn. He didn't always follow instructions. He found it difficult. He'd even been involved in bullying. This is a young man that I know who volunteers at Bramley Elderly Action Neighbourhood Network and is so kind and so tender to those older people, relates to me on an equal basis to other volunteers, and was unrecognisable in the description that I was given of his school behaviour. And I have come across other examples of that as well. There was a group of 4 young people who attend the same school that came to our Children's Summit with a Barker youth worker as part of a Barker group. And Barker focus on high challenge children. And their behaviour in the summit was absolutely model. They came up with ideas, they asked questions, they behaved perfectly, they had perfect table manners. It was like 2 different groups of children. It was just unbelievable. And I think the way we choose to engage with some of those children, you called them hard to reach. They're not actually that hard to reach. You've just got to have the right attitude, and they've got to believe it's on an equal basis that you're engaging. And I don't think that's always observed in schools. Of course, you always have to have boundaries and you always have to have rules, but there is something about a formal teacher, secondary school structure, which definitely turns some children off and makes them behave quite differently from how they would actually prefer to behave. So I don't know what we can do about that, Dave. I don't know whether you want to comment on it, but I do think there's room for looking at the way adults approach and engage with young people in a school environment as well as outside. And while I've been given the space to speak, Chair, can I just also comment, the figures on attendance in this report are self-evident and they are alarming. I don't know whether you would just like to remind us of what the expectations are for primary and secondary attendance and how far below that we are in Leeds.
The I mean, do you want me to come on attendance? So we're looking at 96%. I mean, I think nationally there's an issue with attendance nationally. I think that a lot of schools and academy trusts across the country are struggling with attendance. We would expect 96 plus. And ideally, you're looking to get your attendance up at 97%, so that you really sort of got the full engagement of those young people in school. So then there's a lot of work to be done right across the sector, from local authorities, attendance teams, to schools, to academy trusts, just to really engage a lot of children who have sort of, those issues have been compounded by the pandemic as well, in terms of being out of school, out of routines, mental health. We've mentioned young people's mental health is a real significant issue at the moment, nationally and in Leeds, to get those young people back into school. So there's a lot to be done there. In terms of the performance of young people in and out of school, it's a tricky one, and I guess that's about the culture and the ethos within the school itself and how they manage those young people, and schools and academies as self-governing would be taking a look at that, of how they approach that. Our teams would always be willing to support in terms of the pupil voice, in terms of Hannah's teams, working alongside those schools to how do you engage those young people effectively if they need us to. But yeah, sometimes you do see differences in that, and it's just a setting, isn't it? How young people can respond to different settings.
Thank you, Shaheen.
Thank you. I was just going to mention something that we do as a council, and we promote this inclusivity all the time for all the work that we do with our partners in the city, which is unconditional positive regard. And we want our children to be held in that. And one example of that is a Safe Task Force, which is a DfE funded initiative to reduce serious violent crime and increase attendance. And part of that offer that we formed in the council is something called pro-social identity training. And that is to see children in a different light, just as you've described in that experience. How can we engage our children in school so that they're seen, They're felt, seen, they're heard, and they're held, but they're held in that positive regard, and they're seen for individuals and characters that they are, as opposed to fitting a school system. How does that work? We've managed to reach 2,000 children through that pro-social identity training, and through that offer as well, we will be training all school staff in how they are approaching children in a way that builds a relationship between the two. Most of our schools and most of our staff are keen at partnership in how they view and how they support the educational outcomes, but most importantly, the well-being of the children. And we're really, really thankful for that. Those partnerships, they are really, really strong, but there are pockets where we do need to challenge that back. However, we still have those relationships with those settings that actually they are holding quite a lot of pressures and issues, and sometimes relations can fall as a result of that. Then it's for us how to bolster that and support that process. So just wanted to mention that that's something happening in the city at the moment, and it's proving quite impactful.
Just to come in as well, just perhaps two other things that I think are really relevant for this conversation. So one is our absolute ambition and commitment to be a trauma-informed city. And again, I think, I see any behaviour as a means of communication, ultimately, so again, we've got investment from health. We are really looking at, I suppose, our workforce development offer, again, to universal services, schools, early years sector, children's social care. And, fundamentally, when we're looking at a child, who is communicating through their behaviour, rather than looking at that child and thinking, what's wrong with you, really it's beholden on us to be looking at the child and thinking what's happened, and what is it that you're trying to communicate through your behaviour. So I think that whole commitment to a trauma-informed city, trauma-informed approach, but actually how we upskill the workforce, in that is key. The other thing, I think, you take me back to our early help qualification. And again, if we're thinking about early intervention and prevention, and the feedback that we had from a police officer is on one of our videos actually to promote the early help qualification, where he was really talking about his experience, and this won't just be in the police, it will be, across the partnership, of really not having that much input, when he was training around child development. And actually there was a section on the early intervention qualification around adolescent brain development. And he's on the video sort of sharing his experience of coming across a young 11-year-old, 12-year-old boy in the street after he'd done the session on adolescent brain development. And what he describes on the video is actually when he came across that child after having had that input, he saw him in a completely different way. And he was looking through the lens of child development, adolescent, and his response, therefore, was completely different. So I think this is where we really need a whole system approach to this whole area, and that's where the partnerships and the beauty of the strong partnerships in Leeds will come into their own.
Yes.
I absolutely, completely agree with what you've said. And I think every teacher education programme, initial training, should include child development. I think traditionally it probably has at primary level for some bizarre reason, not at secondary level where perhaps it's needed even more. I really think it's absolutely essential that anybody with a role in school understands child development through to adolescence. But I don't think that's the case, is it, Julie?
Do you know, I wouldn't want to just focus on school, because actually I think in terms of the partnership, I think we've all got work to do. And I think, to be honest with you, when you think that what we now know and research tells us is that actually your brain is not really fully developed until you're 25, So I think as a partnership, we've got work to do in this area. I think the positive thing is that we recognise that, in our work, as I've said, through workforce development, through the trauma-informed approach, the work that Shaheen's just describing, we're aware of it. And again, it's, as I've said, it's a key priority for us across the partnership.
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to go back to the neat and not known, if I may. Obviously, you're striving towards a more data-led approach on these, and I accept that we don't know. That's why they're in the not known category. However, as a corporate parent in this city, I personally feel that every one of those young people is a concern until it's proven to me that they are not a concern. And so I wholeheartedly agree that the data-driven approach is right. And perhaps if this or anything similar comes back to us again, we could have maybe a table to break down the numbers rather than just say there are 719 young people recorded as NEET. There are 1,035 young people recorded as not known. We could perhaps, you know, lead on with exactly what status they fall under, so that we are reassured that they are not a concern, because I believe that every one of those children is currently a concern. And you know, I do think it's right that we look very closely at every one of them until we're satisfied that they are not a concern. Thank you.
Yes, I'd agree with that completely. So the point I was making before is almost exactly what you're saying. We need to find out exactly where they are so we can rule out those who aren't a concern and then support those who are. But yeah.
Thanks for that, Councillor Pratt. Thanks for that, Councillor Smith. Helen.
I'm just wondering, is there any data, or is the potential for gathering data on those, on where the red lights are occurring before they become NEET? There will be some children who, because of the nature of them, whether it be their background or disability, have the potential to more likely become NEET. So the focus is obviously going to be on them. But are there points within from 4 to whatever age of the child's education when there are other kind of gluts, when children start to drop out? Is it to do with hormones in adolescence? I think that would be really helpful if we could have some data on that, or if there is any data or plans to obtain data on that. And then I just wanted to make another couple of comments. I think obviously ethos and approach is really important of a school, but we've got to bear in mind that a lot of schools are running on skeleton staff at the moment. It is so difficult. Staff are under incredible stress, and that is bound to have an effect on how they are with each other and how they are with pupils, which is a real concern. And there was something else. Oh, it's going to come to me once I've stopped speaking, but I did have something else and it's gone.
Thank you for that. So just in terms of addressing those 2 points, we are engaging with a DFE, specialist attendance advisor, and what we've asked is that we look at the precursors for children not attending but also becoming NEET. So what are the indicators of that, and can we sort of curb that? What can we do for support? And on the back of that as well, we're also looking at employing, as part of the Safe Task Force, which I just mentioned, some NEET advisors within each. We have area inclusion partnerships, which is a group of schools that come together to really work on inclusion and not excluding children who are at risk of exclusion. And as part of that, we've employed education inclusion mentors to really wrap that support around the child and the family to ensure that they can attend, but also those who are at risk of serious violent crime, to reduce that figure. But part of that will be and can be a NEET indicator. So how can we branch off and support that attendance separately from the education inclusion mentor who is working on a holistic relationship with the child? How can we then use the sort of DFE guidance to support us and the school and the family, so we don't go down the punitive line? What is it that we can support them with so they don't become NEET? So there's a piece of research that we're doing at the moment on that, and that can feature as part of the work programme when we're looking at doing a deep dive on attendance. How can we bring in that DFE specialist knowledge to ensure that some of that legislation is carried out in a way that supports our relational practice and our child-friendly Leeds approach? And how can we capture the voice of children within that as well? So that's just coming back on that point as well. So I hope that can cover in terms of the work programme, that deep dive into attendance with the aspect of NEAT as well.
Just come back in because I've remembered.
Sorry, I'm just going to, sorry if I may, I'm going to read Julian first and then let you come back. Thanks.
Thank you.
So it was just to talk about transition. And I think the work that we're doing, as I've said, across the partnership is looking at the journey of the child, you know, and again, just as you're saying, are there patterns, are there pressure points, you know, and when we look at transitions, we know that they are key points where children, for a number of reasons, you know, can drop out of education or begin to find education more difficult, you know, for all the reasons that we've discussed this morning. So again, that focus on the journey of the child, and again, that data-driven approach within that, again, will be key for us.
Thank you. That's great. Thanks, Julie and Shaheen. The other thing I wanted to comment on that somebody's brought up is around training on child development or understanding of child development. I mean, when I did my BEd starting in 1988, a long time ago, I had an awful lot of training on child pedagogy and development, and that has really informed my practice over a period over 30 years in school. And I think I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think a lot of new teachers and young teachers are getting that now. And maybe that needs to be something that happens in school. If it's not being provided and we can't make that provision happen in the training, then maybe there needs to be a focus once they are qualified and they get that training as part of their ECT years.
So as part of the early career teacher framework and as part of the ITE, there is cognitive load theory, so how children learn, and cognitive overload. So that part of it is done. But in terms of trauma informed, I think this is where we're going, the trauma informed nature of it, of how children communicate, the different ways of communication and the different behaviours they show to communicate. I think it's that part that we can sort of look at, and we can certainly tie in a lot of work with our university. We're very lucky to have the credible universities on our doorstep who engage in a lot of that research and are out in schools currently looking at that as part of an offer, and that will inform their ITE as well in terms of their packages. So I know certainly from a learning point of view and a neuroscience point of view, that is a part of it, and that has to be part of it. But in terms of trauma informed, I think that's where we need to sort of bang the drum on in creating that as a real module for each of those training offers.
I think sometimes as well, we've got to think more broadly. So again, if we think about, I think about poverty and the increased poverty within the city, and actually children being hungry, and again, knowing the importance, for a child to be, we talk about us being our best every day, but for a child to be their best as they're entering that school in the morning, it's about having had a calm start to the day, having been fed, having been nurtured, so I think when we think about school readiness or all the things that can hamper or get in the way of a child being their best, I think we do need to think about those inequalities across the city and actually, how we as a partnership are responding to those.
Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to follow up on some of the points that Helen was making, and also Councillor Gruen about related to the pressures on staff, and also thinking about training. I think when we talk about a trauma-informed approach, it is very important to keep that in mind. I guess one of my questions would be, how is that shared? So what programmes are there within a professional setting for staff to be able to take part in that? Is there specific time that's set aside for staff to participate in that? I think it's one thing for people to have access to, for example, an online module or to have access to training, but we're all well aware of the pressures that many staff are under, and continue to be. And I think there does need to be the time for that, and we need to take into account the time and all of the other pressures that are on staff. And I think it's something that can be beneficial for staff at all levels. I don't think it's only newer staff or people who are training. I think that there are things that everybody can learn from it. So I think it'd be interesting to hear about some of the programs that are available, and also to get an idea of take up as well, how many people are accessing those programs and so on. I appreciate you might not have this information right now, so I don't want to put you on the spot about this, but it would be useful, I think, to be aware of some of that background.
No, thank you. And that's, it's really, really relevant. I think your point about ensuring that our workforce at every level that we enable them as leaders to be able to have the time to focus on their own professional development, I think is key. And again, I don't think that is just an issue for school. I think that's an issue, we talked earlier, we've referenced recruitment and retention and the challenges that we've got across the country in terms of the public sector. And I think we cannot I think it's really helpful actually to highlight that this morning, because we can't take our eye off the ball in terms of workforce development. And we need to, I suppose we need to remember that that is key. Not just in terms of us being able to respond to the needs of children and families, but also our ability to be able to fulfil our duty of care to our staff in terms of their own professional development and ensuring that they've got the skills to do the job that they're being employed to do. So I think that's key. In terms of the trauma-informed work, it's early days. So we've just got a significant investment from health into that. We've got a small team who are just being recruited at the moment, and they are we've got education psychologists, we've got child, adolescent and mental health, and we've also got children's social care specialism within that. And they're currently at a strategic level, we're looking at what will that programme of work be in terms of, I suppose, the workforce development offer to the broader partnership. So we've not, we're looking at how that might be delivered. So as an example, when we rolled out restorative practice, we looked at that at a cluster level. So we brought individuals from across the partnership. So it was schools, it was health visitors, it was family support workers, and they did those sessions collectively on a sort of multidisciplinary. So there's lots of different approaches that we could take. But I think, to be honest with you, key to this is us having the conversation with school leaders in the city and others about actually how best we can do this, because the point that you've just made is a challenge to all of us, at a time when we probably have less staff trying to do more and trying to do a really, really, really good job. How do we ensure as leaders, as I've already said, that we are enabling them and freeing them up to focus on their own professional development? So I haven't got all the answers, but the conversations are absolutely live, and there is a commitment across the partnership, for us to do that.
Just one or two more on this, Councillor Carter.
Very quickly, I think we all agree with a lot of what has been said today. Very sensible, very good contributions. But Mr. Britton hit the nail on the head when he said you can identify at a very early age what child is going to be a problem, is going to have difficulties. And that child may leave school without being able to read or write or add up. That child will then have no option but to go into criminality. And those are the kids that are the most important. And some of those kids will be special needs kids.
Briefly, if you would.
I will, yeah. Maybe just come back to early years and that focus on early years. And if we think about the 3A strategy that we've got, and actually narrowing that right down, we know that actually a child's ability to read is a determinant actually of how they are going to go on and to achieve progress against a range of outcomes in life. So for me, focusing on that reading in our early years sector, is, again, it's small, and it's sometimes it's about narrowing that you can't eat an elephant in one chunk, and sometimes it's about really putting our emphasis and our resources where we know it will make a difference. And that focus on reading is absolutely key.
I'm going to move on. Sincere project. I do want to, and I've purposely given this item significant time because it's obviously the last time this plan is going to come to this board. Perhaps just to round off this item, just perhaps invite Councillors Pryor and Venner and Julie as well, perhaps. Just your thoughts. This is obviously this plan comes to a close, as it were. And it's about how Leeds can improve the lives and outcome for children and young people within the city. Just as we move to the next plan, what are your takeaways and what's your learning, as it were, from a Leeds City perspective that we take into the future from this? Absolutely, any of you.
I'm happy to start. I probably go, and I say this with humility, but I probably go back to our ILAC report last year, so our inspection of local authority children's services. And in that report, it talks about the partnership in Leeds being strong. It talked about us having effective arrangements across the city, both in relation to help and protection. So my takeaway is, we're going to go back to Mother Teresa, her little saying, which is, none of us are really here to do great things. We've all got the capacity to do little things, but actually all those little things put together, it can make a massive, massive difference. So my takeaway really is about partnership work. We've all the issues that we've talked about this morning, they're not just issues for schools, they're not just issues for health, they're not just issues for children's social care, they're issues that as a partnership we need to get to grips with. And when I talk about a partnership, those with lived experience, our children, our young people, our parents, our carers, being seen as, key elements of that partnership. So we're as good at how we work together, and we're lucky in Leeds that that's strong, but we've got to continue to cultivate that and embed that and be ambitious for ourselves as a partnership so that we can be ambitious for children and families.
I suppose I would agree with all of that. I think Leeds' strength has always been not that we are perfect in every area, but that we are very good at identifying when things aren't working and then having a relentless focus on that. So for me, kind of the main takeaway from this is, and not to sound like a broken record, is using the data to work out exactly where we need to be focusing that support, and really narrowing it in on exactly those children that need that additional support. Goes without saying, we have fewer resources than we did years back, so we need to be making sure that the resources we do have, we are using to the most effective way.
Councillor Banner.
Thank you, Chair. I think what I would take forward is our ongoing commitment to early help, early intervention and prevention. And when we look at one of our other obsessions, which hasn't been touched on much today in discussing the performance review around looked after children, yes, the numbers are going up, but they are not going up at anything like the rate that they are per 10,000 in other core cities. And they are still nowhere near the rate they were when we were inadequately rated. And that is because of our commitment to early help and prevention. So that is what I would take forward, plus the centrality of the voice of children and young people. That was a particularly heartwarming part of our ILAC's report last year to read about how that shone through, including in the children and young people they directly met. And it's reflected in the changes in the new plan as we go into the new plan. For example, having a priority around climate change, which is brought in because that's something young people and children are so passionate about themselves. So those would be what I would take forward to the new plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Renshaw is going to make a teeny pointette.
Yeah, I'd just like to ask a question about page 74 and then the life coaching. Has that started yet? How many have we got in our city? And how are they identifying whereabouts they're being located? And are all schools letting them in? Because I know a lot of academies have actually got their own mental health service. So I'd just like an update.
Yeah, did we not ask for an update on that at the top of the meeting? Okay, very, very briefly. I know you're going to bring an update to a future meeting on that, but
yeah, just to say we can bring an update to a future meeting, but they are in place, and to be honest, they're essential to everything that we've talked about today. We've already referenced them in relation to children who are not in education, children in employment. We've already mentioned I suppose the relationship between mental health and the fact that children may not be in education, training, and employment. So they're key, and be very, very happy to bring an update on their work to a future meeting.
Thank you. Can I thank everybody for your input into that item. As I say, I purposely gave it quite significant space because it was the last time it's going to be coming, although obviously its successor will come to this board. And thanks to officers and to Councillor Brown, Councillor Venner for your input into that. So let's move then swiftly and speedily to item 11, review of the Youth Justice Plan. We have some new quick officer changeover, seamless. But if I'd not mentioned it, you'd have not even noticed it. Oh, I'd love a glass of water, thank you. And as soon as they're sat down, I'll invite the officers to introduce themselves, and we will then move on to the item. So if I could invite the officers just joined us to introduce yourselves, and then we'll kick off with the item. We've had a standing ovation already.
Hi everyone, my name's Farah Khan. I'm Chief Officer for Family Help.
Hi everyone, I'm Helen Burton. I'm the Service Manager for the Youth Justice Service.
Morning everyone, my name's Patsy Burrows. I've recently joined Leeds City Council as the Head of Service for Corporate Parenting with responsibility for children looked after, care leavers and the Youth Justice Service.
Thank you so much for introducing yourselves. Welcome to our meeting. Who's going to kick off on this? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm delighted to introduce this report. I'll make some brief comments and then obviously hand over to officers who can fill in more operational detail. So this report, the Youth Justice Plan went to full council last year and it comes to scrutiny regularly. It's a condition of the funding that we get for the Youth Justice Service that we have a Youth Justice Plan and that it gets updated regularly. The first point that I'd want to draw your attention to is that the report refers to a child first philosophy. So that's about the fact that it's really, really important part of the service that children in the Youth Justice Service are seen as children first. So that's not in any way to negate the fact that sometimes they have committed serious crimes and we have to protect the public, but they are children first, and that's really important and really underlines all the work of the service. I'd really encourage people to visit the Youth Justice Service, which I've had the privilege of doing many times. I've shadowed staff, I've spent quite considerable amount of time with Youth Justice team, and the love and passion that the staff have for their work is inspiring. The report refers to a number of issues, including the impact of poverty, which was referred to in the last item as well, and the impact that that has on increase in offences committed. Last time I was at the Youth Justice Service, the staff were talking about some of the offences children had committed, which included stealing things like cleaning products, baby wipes, things that they knew they could sell because that's what people needed. So the impact of poverty is really profound within the Youth Justice Service, and part of the work that the service is doing is directly supporting families. I've been out with them delivering food parcels before now. Partnership work is really crucial. We have really positive relationships with CAMS, with the police, with the youth service, with the third sector. There are some particular issues that are referenced, including the issue of disproportionality. We were part of HMIP thematic inspection a couple of years ago. So that's not an inspection where you get a judgment as an authority. It's where they go around a number of authorities to look at a particular theme. And what they were looking at then was disproportionality in terms of particularly young Black and dual heritage boys and young men in the youth justice system. One of the things we identified in Leeds was disproportionality around young men who'd as a first offence were ending up in custody. So young men not in contact with our service young Black and dual heritage men not in contact with our service, committing a really serious offence and being in custody. What was really striking in that was that a number of those young men had unrecognised SEND and SEMH needs, and clearly had missed out on early help at a younger age, both in education and in social care. So that's a real priority for us. You won't be surprised to hear that serious youth violence is also a priority, and there's really comprehensive work happening between Children's Services and Safer Leeds, which we can talk about more if you want to hear more about that. Access to education, which we've just been discussing at length, is of crucial importance for the young people that we're working with. Staff are really fierce about fighting for the rights of children to be in education. One of the shadowing meetings I did was actually in a school where a youth justice worker was trying to get a young person back into school, and really, really fighting their corner. The skill mill is referred to. I get to see them quite a lot, actually, because one of the projects that they're working on is Kirksall Forge, which is in my ward. And that's a really good example of supporting young people to turn their lives around, and some really positive stories. The last graduation I went to at Skill Mill, which was about a month ago, included a young man who'd been on the Skill Mill and was now working on a job as a manager, supervising other young people at Skill Mill. It's a really, really positive partnership that we have. You will know, it's in the report, that the service at its last judgment got a judgment of requires improvement in 2019, and the action plan to address that is included in the report you've seen, and you'll note that most of the actions have been completed. We've just had another thematic inspection from HMIP, and the report on that hasn't been published yet, but we've got incredibly positive feedback verbally, and we are confident that when we are re-inspected, we will get out of requires improvement. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Julie, are you going to pick up, or colleagues?
I'm happy just to add a little bit to what Councillor Venner has said. So, Councillor,
if I may, just the one word of note is, do bear in mind, obviously colleagues will have read the reports. I'm always anxious when we get to scrutiny reports that officers don't simply take us through the report we've already read.
Yeah, no, I wasn't about to do that, but absolutely, Chair, take your comments on board. I think I was really just going to highlight the complexity of the work. I was at a conference on Monday, which was organised by the National Child Safeguarding panel. And there was a real focus in those discussions around contextual safeguarding. So that really is where children and young people where there's risk outside the home. And I'm just really conscious, again, as I've said, of the complexity of this work, but the seriousness of this work. So when we're looking at youth violence within the city, when we're looking at, increased serious incidents of youth violence, clearly the impact on children, young people, families and communities, but also the impact on our workforce. And I'm very mindful, again, we've already talked about the duty of care that we have as leaders to our workforce and ensuring that we are holding our workforce and equipping them, both personally and professionally, to manage, and I say actually rather than manage, navigate, because often it is about navigating a really, really complex set of circumstances. So I just wanted to make that point, but very happy to take questions in relation to the report itself.
Colleagues, questions, comments, observations, thoughts, concerns? It's interesting, just picking up what Councillor Venner mentioned in terms of the disproportionality of young men from Black and minority ethnic backgrounds. Just linking in with the comments that Councillor Carter made in the previous debate about the young people, young men, young boys disadvantaged in the education system, the feed through and the importance of getting that right at the earliest stage. Sorry, Councillor Carter.
Yeah, you're right. Black and mixed race boys do tend to be disproportionately represented in the youth justice system. However, it is predominant. If you go into the Wetherby Young Offenders, I have done many occasions on behalf of Martin House, where those kids have been raising money for terminally ill children. You'll see that most of them are white kids from disadvantaged backgrounds. So completely take on board what you're saying, Councillor Venner, and agree with you. But please don't forget that the kids that are having the trouble are the white kids from white boys from disadvantaged backgrounds. I can't underline that enough. It's just heartbreaking when you go in there.
Thank you, Chair. Just in, in addition to, or also just adding to what the councillor has just said, it would be nice also to have some data on, the Black minorities. I am representing Bemintos and Richmond Hill, and, we do have issues around our area. So it would be nice to also understand what, your team, I think it's Shaheen, what your team is doing, and how can we understand everything, like data and everything, because really I would love to have that data and just understand it and maybe kind of like build up from that. We've had issues, lots of issues around our Black minority, young boys being involved in crime. Possibly the West Yorkshire Police as well, data would help. I'm just not wanting us to just base it on one side. It would be nice to have an inclusive information on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to respond to Councillor Carter's point, and I'm really sorry if this sounds like I'm making a really obvious point, but the biggest cohort that the Youth Justice Service works with is white British children, and that's because that's the biggest population. However, there are particular groups who are statistically more likely to end up in the youth justice system, and that's what the disproportionality is. It's saying that in the Youth Justice Service, there's a disproportionate amount of certain groups, including looked after children, including people from certain diverse communities, compared to the percentage they are of the general population. So that's why we focus on care on children. Overlooked, but there are some groups that are more vulnerable, and they are a higher percentage of the youth justice service than you would expect, given the percentage they are of the population. Thank you.
I think actually we're both saying almost the same thing. Just in terms of background and various backgrounds, pages 23 to 33 of the report, actually going to quite some depth across that piece. It's quite helpful. Other comments, questions? Yes, you can, please.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to come back on the issue around education and supporting young people who are exploited or involved in violence as early as we can. And there's a real appetite for, from secondary schools to engage with us on that work. So as Councillor Venner mentioned earlier, we're working with the Safer Leeds partners and soon to be expanding, setting up across the 3 areas of the city. We already have it in the east of the city. We're going to implement the youth violence area meetings, and that's in partnership with the police. They will be chaired by the police, but the local third sector organisations will be invited, as will our teams. And that's that really early identification of young people when they are disengaging and when they are showing signs of vulnerability to being exploited or gang affiliation, which then we know leads to violence. As part of that work, we're going to set up a task and finish group with secondary school heads in particular across the city to look at some of the challenges that they're facing, but also how we can take that work forward together. And at the starting point, I guess,
young people are telling us in lots of ways the things they are struggling with. And I just want to take members back to, I'm sure you will have heard of the work of Listen Up Leeds and around Black Boy Joy, when boys were telling us about how they felt, how they were treated by services, how they felt not listened to and often treated as older than they were, and why they had a distrust in services. So we're using that to inform us of what the next steps are. And we've seen some really good outcomes in that partnership locality working, and we're going to focus that on youth violence.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Gruen.
Thank you. I just want to say we do feel the impact of white working class disadvantaged boys in our ward. We see it every single day, that they are not coping with the boundaries around them and they are causing others harm. So I'm absolutely aligned with you on that one. But I just wanted to say, I do think when you read through the report, the whole sort of pedagogy of child first and voice of the child and understanding what the motivations for the behaviours are is absolutely right. Absolutely right. My question would be, how do you know that's working? I've looked at the figures, etc., and there are some areas of slippage and what have you, but are we absolutely convinced that works? Because it feels really right. And what I might have liked actually was some really positive case histories perhaps to look at. I'd be interested in that at a future meeting. And then a specific question is on page 8 in the introductory lines about the arrangements for the delivery of youth justice services. It says that the Youth Justice Service sits in the group of services primarily focusing on children looked after. Why is that?
I'm happy just to come back on the final point. It might be the wording, Councillor Gruen, which is perhaps not helpful. It really reflects the fact that Patsy, as head of service for corporate parenting children looked after, has the Youth Justice Service in her portfolio. So we probably might have worded it a little bit differently.
Yeah, I get that, but why is it in Patsy's portfolio?
I think because a range of issues really, but I think not least that just thinking about some of the overrepresentation actually of children looked after in the Youth Justice Service, overrepresentation of children, care leavers in the Criminal Justice Service. So again, there's something there about, I suppose, the crossover in terms of insight and understanding into some of the patterns, themes, and I suppose just the makeup of the Youth Justice Service cohort, that actually it feels that there's a closer alignment with that than there might be with some of the other sort of portfolio areas. That's not to say, and it's really important for me to stress, that whole focus on early intervention and prevention. And actually, when we're thinking about, I suppose, our developing family help service, I'm really, really keen, and we're having those conversations already, that within, thinking again about early intervention and prevention, through that family help service, what is going to be our offer to those children who do have special educational needs and disabilities, to those children who, if we don't respond to their needs effectively, may be involved in the criminal justice system. So I think there's just something, whilst there's a rationale for it to sit with Patsy, that's not to say that the other heads of service don't take that partnership approach.
I was actually coming at it from a slightly different angle. I'm sorry to talk about you in the third person, Patsy. It wasn't meant to be derogatory in any way. I was coming at it more than, because you've said overrepresentation of children looked after in the youth justice system. But I don't really pick that up from the report. I'm wearing my corporate parents hat. I don't pick that up as a significant priority or a significant overrepresented group when I read through the report, and perhaps I should.
The only thing that I would add to what Julie said is that, when you think about those early experiences of children who later come to the attention of the Youth Justice Service, you're looking very often at very similar circumstances between children who become looked after and children who are not looked after, in that experience of trauma, all of that stuff that we know. And so I think what's really important is the partnerships and the pathways that we open up for children looked after are absolutely, there's a real correlation there and a real opportunity for those children who are open to the Youth Justice Service to benefit from that really good work that is happening across the city in relation to looked after children and care leavers.
Thank you for that. Tony.
On page, 4 of your report, or page 86 on the papers, you point out that 44.1% of the school population live in the most deprived areas of the city, which are also areas of higher crime and antisocial behaviour, which seems to be logical, really. In the next paragraph, you go on to say that the youth justice area-based team model works well in understanding these. Could you give us more details about how this works? Because I'm quite concerned that on page 96, reoffending has gone up.
I'm happy to respond to that. I suppose our area-based model fits with the makeup of children's services area-based model as well. And what that really enables is for us to build up relationships. So to build up relationships within the education sector, with the third sector, with partners within those areas, including neighbourhood policing teams as well. And through those relationships, that's where we see that kind of real development of work within the partnership. And I think for me, the partnership is what's really key in developing those relationships.
But reoffending's gone up. Knife crimes have gone up. So, it's certain questions to be asked about how successful is it when it doesn't seem, when it's not reflected in those figures.
I think it's really tragic for us as a city that reoffending and knife crime has gone up. But I guess we have to understand the current context that our young people are facing. And so if we look at the impact of poverty, of a well-being, of mental health, of what families are facing, it is not surprising. It is a strength of our locality working that we are engaging young people, and we do have an accurate picture of where we're at and what we're hopeful as we move towards more locality working in relation to our services. As I mentioned earlier, the youth crime meetings, the localised model, that we will be able to tackle those figures. Young people, the engagement rate with our youth offending services and the partnership work that goes on in that arena is really successful. The success isn't evident in the figures. They are not where we'd like them to be, but we are hopeful that that will improve. I want to come back to the point on looked after services and early help. The youth violence sits in my portfolio as the Chief Officer for Family Help. And we work very closely with Patsy around our corporate responsibilities to those fewer children, but children that are actually at the extreme end where we see the harm, alongside preventative services to take that learning together. So I want to reassure everybody here that it does sit within Family Help.
Sorry, can I just follow up to what Farah said in relation to reducing re-entrance, reoffending? I think you're absolutely right. It is concerning that those figures remain high, and that's exactly why it remains an absolute priority for the plan going forward next year.
Thanks. You are satisfied? I don't think any of us are.
Not really.
Okay.
I just wonder, the plan for next year, how is it different from the plan for this year?
Julie.
Oh, thank you, Chair. So I think, as Farah and Patsy have said, if we think about the rising population in Leeds, especially of adolescents, if we think about the biggest increase has been within the inner city areas, which are the areas of highest deprivation. If we think about, as has been said, some of the cost of living crisis and how that is driving children and young people to become involved, to be exploited, because that's what we're talking about. We're talking about child exploitation. I think sometimes we need to get our language right as well. It remains an absolute ambition for us. So some of the things that we are doing, as an example, is we have our early help hubs, and we deliberately place those early help hubs in the areas of highest deprivation. Within those hubs, we do have police officers, we have substance misuse coordinators, mental health coordinators, domestic violence coordinators. They are all commissioned through the third sector. We've just had an evaluation of the hubs, and actually, and that was undertaken by the DFE. And what that's highlighted is that in terms of hard and fast outcomes that the hubs are evidencing, actually, there is evidence that they are having an absolute impact on reducing antisocial behaviour in children and young people, but also positive impact on those children who might be on the edge of crime, on the edge of youth justice services, on the edge of being exploited. So one of the things that we absolutely will be doing is developing those hubs. We are going to expand them. We're going to go from 3 to 7. One of the other things that we've been doing in the city is in the east of the city. And I suppose, recognising the demographics are really, really key, because the challenges that we have in the east of the city will look very differently to the challenges that we may have elsewhere in the city. So one of the things that we've developed in the east is partners coming together. So third sector, police, children's social care, early help, to look at, I suppose, triangulating information. So really looking at incidents that have occurred, looking at individual children, looking at their relationships with other children, mapping out, and again, it goes back to that data, that intelligence, and then using that, triangulating that, and looking at places, looking at spaces, looking at the nighttime economy. As an example, the conference that I was at on Monday was talking about, your individual who may work on the door of Primark. They are likely to have as much intelligence potentially about children and young people that we ought to be concerned about, out of school time, as much as the social worker sitting out in the social work office. So what we've been doing is really piloting that work in the east of the city. But what we're now doing is we're rolling that out. So that panel, for want of a better word, that partnership approach, we're going to replicate that in the south, in the west of the city. And just as Farah said, when we're looking at our family help offer, this data, this intelligence, this triangulation is going to be absolutely key. So there are a few of the things that we will be doing in terms of the plan for 23-24. But again, very happy to come back and give people more detail on that.
Thank you for that. I don't want to be curtailing debate. Equally, I'm keeping an eye on the clock because I don't want to get the reputation as the chair that keeps meetings going for several hours where you need to bring food with you. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. Very conscious of the clock as well. I wanted to come back to Councillor Venner's opening remarks. So talking about partnership work, which other people have referred to as well. On page 5 of the report, it talked about previous difficulties with the CAMS database being unavailable, and some of the challenges that posed for partnership work. So, and I certainly take the point about people with unidentified needs, young people with unidentified needs. So I guess one of my questions was about the information sharing that takes place when you have different services using different systems. What measures are being taken to bring those different systems together and to make sure that people are sharing information? I think also thinking about what Julie referred to just now in terms of mapping out where young people are, getting different people working together. what steps are being taken to engage with those young people who are very difficult to engage with, and particularly those who would be very suspicious of the police and would be very suspicious of professional involvement. I know we talked a little bit earlier on about some of the measures that are being taken, but I think that's really important, that we listen to those young people who can be in any part of the city, who would be very distrustful of authority figures. And also about the skill mill, just another request. That was it was really interesting to hear about that. I think it would be very helpful for all of us as ward councillors, whether we're new or whether we're very seasoned at this, to know about where they're working in the city, and so both as ward councillors and also within our respective community committees, to know a bit about the work that they're doing within our areas. I think that would be very helpful. Thank you.
I'm happy to respond in the first instance. So just in relation to the point about data and mapping data and systems speaking to each other. So in Leeds, we, as in most local authorities, we have what we call our MACE arrangements, so multi-agency child exploitation arrangements. And there's different sorts of levels within that. So we have what's called our bronze operational arrangements. So that's whereby at our front door, so the front door for children's social care, colleagues again from police, from children's social care, from early help, from education, from the third sector, will meet routinely to share information from their individual systems about children, as an example, who've gone missing. I was at a meeting with head teachers probably about 6 weeks ago, where we had a detective inspector come along with Jane Maxwell from our Safer Leeds within the local authority to highlight again with schools the portal that the police have. So any school teacher can log information which they feel might be relevant. Now that could be an emblem that a child has written on a book. It could be, anything that they feel may be important in terms of gathering intelligence. So at that operational level, that is happening. You're absolutely right in terms of our systems, and actually the national Josh McAllister review, that's an area that nationally the government are looking at, because we can't solve that locally in terms of our electronic systems, but we can do our best in relation to having those operational meetings which happen regularly at the front door. It was out of that operational meeting that we developed the work in the east of the city around places and spaces which we're now rolling out. In addition to that, we have what's called, our silver tier, and we have a risk and vulnerability subgroup, which sits underneath the local Safeguarding Child Partnership in Leeds. And again, that's a multi-agency meeting, but I suppose focuses much more perhaps on strategy. So what's our youth violence strategy? What's our child exploitation strategy? Because there is a role for us, again, having a really clear vision and response as a partnership. And then we have our gold level, which basically sits at the LSCP exec. So really at every single level of those MACE arrangements, people are sharing intelligence, sharing information, but also thinking about how can we do it differently? How can we do it better? And how can we bring the voice of the child? I might hand over to Helen, who might just want to talk to you about actually some of the ways in which we do that. I chair the Youth Justice, as I've already said, Partnership Board, and we've got a commitment to every single meeting, hearing the voice of the child in some shape or form. I'll perhaps just hand over to Helen.
Yeah, I suppose I'd perhaps like to give a couple of examples. So as part of the MACE arrangements, we have a contextual MACE meeting, which is a multi-agency partnership meeting under the MACE arrangements, where we look citywide at themes, trends, peer groups of concerns, locations of concerns relating to risk outside of the home and child exploitation. And I'd like to just give an example of that in practice, where the voice of the child has influenced partnership responses to concerns across the city. We had a child who told us about concerns of an alleyway within the city centre where they were being exploited to sell drugs. that was brought to that meeting, and as a result there was a lot of work between Children's Services and Safer Leeds to get that alleyway closed down or gated. Lots of conversations with legal representatives within court arena and with highways, looking at how that part of the city centre can be made safe. Other examples of that are children telling us about abandoned buildings that they're spending time in, and responses to making sure that those buildings are secured, that they can't get entry to them, that the owners of those buildings are taking responsibility for keeping them safe. So they're just a couple of real life examples as to how the voice of the child really is feeding into a citywide partnership response to keeping children safe across the city.
Thank you for that. Just for clarity, I have Councillor Smith, Councillor Martin. Did you want? No. Okay, thank you. I have Councillor Renshaw, Councillor Bowden, Councillor Gruen, and then Councillor Carter. That's the order I have, and that will be it on this item. Otherwise, we'll still be here tomorrow. Okay. So, Councillor Smith, thank you.
Thanks, Chair. So my question is kind of going back to before this report almost. So given the lengths that we go to not to criminalise children, which is perfectly right and accurate, I agree with it. I'd just like to ask, how accurate is this data based on the true picture of youth ASB across the city? And should we have a truer picture of the issues before we, that we're facing before we actually got to this point? So almost should there be a pre-report?
So I suppose this plan thank you, Councillor. This plan focuses on the work of the Youth Justice Service. So by definition, it focuses on the children who are engaged with the Youth Justice Service, albeit absolutely within the report, it does focus on early intervention and prevention. And at the end of the day, as has already been said, that's a key priority for us in the city, and it is a priority actually in the plan, which is really, avoiding children becoming involved with the Youth Justice Service in the first instance. So absolutely. In terms of the data, I mean, the data is the data. The data is accurate. That's pulled off our own internal databases, systems from partners across the city. But I think the point that you make in terms of the early intervention and prevention is a key point. And that's where the work that we're doing through the early help hubs, the work that we're doing through, this triangulating, identifying children is key. I think just thinking back to family help as well. So the recommendation for the family help service is that service will be multidisciplinary. That will be a requirement, that it will be delivered on a local, dedicated, geographical level, that the service which will be provided will be based on a local analysis of needs within that specific area. So again, we're really passionate and excited about this because this gives us a real opportunity, which we're grabbing with both hands, to have those conversations with our partners about what that family help service will look like, and within that, how we do share information, how we can be ambitious in terms of our own systems. So whilst we're here, and it's great that we're here to respond to the children who have become involved in the Youth Justice Service, and more often than not, because they are children that are being exploited. And this is why that child-friendly, that child-first approach has got to be key to everything that we're doing. Absolutely. Early intervention and prevention, is the way in which we're going to turn the tide.
Very briefly, please.
Very briefly, the youth violence meetings that I mentioned earlier, the antisocial behaviour teams are going to be part of those meetings as well.
That's really reassuring. Thank you. Councillor Renshaw.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to ask, it mentions about the mental health care and emotional wellbeing and a meeting that's planned with CAMS. And I know that there's been long waiting lists previously in previous meetings held regarding children's services and the CAMS team. So I just wondered how long that was and whether there was already any integrated work going on between CAMS and children's services.
So within the Youth Justice Service, we have 3 nurses who are seconded into our service. One is a physical health nurse, the other 2 are mental health nurses. So all children who are open to our service get immediate access to those nurses, and a health screening is done for every child who is part of the Youth Justice Service. It's an absolute priority of ours.
Thank you. Councillor Bowden.
It's okay, Chair. I think a lot of things that I wanted to bring up has been addressed. Thank you.
Okay, after missing you out last time, I want to make sure I bring it. Yeah, don't forget. Thank you. Councillor Gruen.
It was a question about the examples that you were giving of working on the information that children have given you, i.e. the child's voice, and then ensuing actions. So, for example, closing down the alley or making buildings sufficiently secure that they can't gain access. Really good responsive actions, but doesn't that just result in the behaviour going elsewhere?
Is it on? Yeah. Sorry, it's about that kind of holistic approach. You know, yes, we're addressing those areas of concern in the city, but that's just one kind of side of the coin, if you like. It's how we then support the child and the support that's put around them. And I think one of the really good things about the Youth Justice Service having strong links with Children's Services is that, you know, whatever the service involvement is for that child, we're able to kind of look at that holistic response. And that's what the MACE framework really is about as well. That kind of low level, those low emerging children who are being exploited, what's the holistic offer to those? So there's a child focused MACE meeting alongside the contextual MACE meeting so that we are addressing both sides of that.
Did that entirely answer your question, Councillor Gruen?
Well, the trouble is, I listened to all this work and it's excellent, and your devotion to it and your commitment and your enthusiasm is remarkable. But I still see antisocial behaviour occurring in Bramley, and I can't perceive any impact on it. So my question was really around, you can do all of those things, as indeed we have in Bramley, but still the antisocial behaviour continues. So you might be supporting those exploited children, but the people doing the exploiting will no doubt be going elsewhere and exploiting different children if that's what they do. So there's a certain degree of, is it just displacing the behaviour? You might be supporting those children, I'm sure you are, but it's still going on.
I think the important thing for me is that exploitation and risk outside of the home is everybody's business, and it's how we as a partnership respond to that. So, over the last 2 years or so, relationships between Safer Leeds and Children's Services really have strengthened, and that links to the work that we've been discussing on serious youth violence and how we're identifying that at an earlier age. At an earlier stage for young people. And I think it's a change of systems. I think, risk outside of the home, for Children's Services for many, many years, it's been about what's going on inside of the home. And this is a new way of thinking and a new way of working. So yeah, I completely take on your point. There are still many concerns across the whole city, Bramley included. But I like to think that we are on that journey together as a partnership to really try and change the whole city's response.
We've also taken learning from Professor Carleen Thurman, whose work around contextual safeguarding looks at this very matter about patterns of perpetrators where they will target young people and how they move around. And she came into Leeds and spent time with our SAFE project and other partners, and was really impressed by some of the work that goes on very early, and then also gave some feedback about how we can strengthen the risk outside the home pathway. And so the youth violence meetings, the children's MACE, the contextual MACE, they will all follow that pattern about disrupting patterns and behaviours of perpetrators, focusing on specific spaces and places where children are exploited, as well as supporting young people and families.
Just to maybe come back on the conference that I was at on Monday, which, as I've said, the National Child Safeguarding Panel had organised the conference. So there was people there from right across the country. And you are right, Councillor Gruen, because this is really, really complex complex work, and actually the people who whose raison d'etre, if you like, organised crime, who exist to exploit children and young people, are constantly changing their models of operation, constantly, there's a whole machine, as you can imagine, behind that. And actually, I suppose as it's been described here, the best we can do is work as a partnership to try and be, as ahead of the game as we possibly can. And sometimes we're catching up. And I think, that was the conversation, if you like, at the conference on Monday, was actually how do we share best practice, not just in Leeds, not just in Yorkshire and Humberside, how do we share best practice from the work that's going on in the London boroughs, thinking about county lines. So, there's no getting away from it. This is a massive challenge for us as an organisation, as a directorate, as a partnership, as a city, but we're absolutely doing our best.
Thank you. Councillor Carter.
Just very quickly, and it was a point of information really for Councillor Edwards, because you were raising what's being done with young children. There's an excellent violence reduction unit in West Yorkshire, and they're doing some really good work with young people. So they're looking at the kids that youth workers can't pick up on because the kids wouldn't think it's very cool to go with the youth workers. So that kind of work is going in. And I know that Farah Khan is now on the Safer Leeds partnership, so she will be interacting, no doubt, with that work.
Thank you for that, Councillor Carter. That's really helpful. Thank you. So we have 3 recommendations within the report that I think, just drawing out of the debate, I think there were some really important concerns raised by both Councillor Gruen in terms of moving issues without necessarily, so we fix the top line problem, but it sometimes just moves the issue and how we work around that, and the really important points raised by Mr. Britton as well. So I think it's important we note those. But then there are 3 core recommendations on page 79 of the report, A, B, and C. I'm not going to read them out in full because I'll say one of the words wrong and then look silly. Are we okay with those? I don't see anybody vehemently shaking their heads. So thank you very much for that. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, officers. Thank you, Councillor Venner. Councillor Pride didn't say anything. Oh, you did. You did. You said one thing. It was very good. Well done. You're trying. Very. Okay. That takes us to item 12, the work programme. If this takes us half an hour, really doing something wrong. Rob.
Thank you, Chair. I don't think it will. So this presents the first work programme item of the year. It's a programme that develops, and it's attached to Appendix 1, but it develops over the course of the year. The Chair and the Board, as we talked about earlier, has significant input. I think the key issue to note is all of the discussion we had earlier on sources of work item that needs to now be reflected, and that's what I'll be doing between now and the July meeting. I don't think, and there'll be opportunity then for members to comment on timing and content, etc. So I don't think, other than that, there's anything else for me to say, Chair. Thank you.
Just to bring in, there is the opportunity, particularly if we're looking to engage with people who may struggle to come to a scrutiny meeting at this time. And I'm always mindful of the fact we put these in the diary because diaries fill up, but we do have the opportunity to do working parties and bring that learning to these meetings, and we can make sure that those working parties are broad and inclusive and are a really good way to, actually in a slightly less intimidating setting sometimes, bring some really wide voices. So I'm not necessarily saying we should, do that in a particular way, but I am keen, if appropriate, that we do make use of those. I'm quite flexible about when we have these meetings, but from experience, having done this for a year or two, it is very difficult to sometimes move meetings around, and I'm also very conscious of officers' work-life balance and the impact on bringing officers in, particularly later on to the evening, etc. So I'm not, as a just a note more than anything that we do have the opportunity to make use of working groups should we feel that's necessary. Thank you for that. Sorry, Rob.
And noted, Chair. I did note from comments under the sources of work as well, the sort of the view that we should hear from as many people as possible, and certainly I'll be trying to address that and work in the background. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. That brings us to the date and time of
Chair, sorry, just on the work programme. I do think we've valued site visits in the past as well. And I feel the same way as you've just described your thoughts about working groups, that site visits can actually add a lot of dimension to the issue being scrutinised.
Completely agree. Completely agree. I should have said and didn't say, I think given what we said about the youth justice piece, I think we'd like to maybe have something come back probably in January, just as a short piece as an update. I kind of intimated to Rob that I would be quite keen to make a visit to the team, and certainly if anybody wants to come along, happy to not go by myself.
What would be helpful, of course, would be advanced dates for these things.
Exactly right.
Short notice is difficult.
I looked in your direction when I was talking about diaries filling up, because it's something you and I have both said repeatedly about, you know, we've got these dates in the diary and then suddenly everything fills up around them. So you councillors, you've got this joy to come. You think you've got a free day. Oh no, you haven't. Thank you for that. Anything else on any of those before we move on to date and time of next meeting? Thank you. Thank you for that. So date of next meeting is Wednesday, the 5th of July at 10 a.m. We'll have a pre-meeting for all board members at 9:30. Can I say a huge thank you to all of you for today, for giving me a fairly smooth ride on my first chairing of the meeting. Very much look forward to working with all of you in the coming year to ensure we get the absolute best possible outcomes for all the children and families within Leeds. Thank you, everybody. I was just drawing to a close.
Sorry, just very quickly on the date of the next meeting. Unfortunately, I'm at the LGA conference in Bournemouth, so
you're just showing off.
If I can send my apologies, I will try and get a replacement.
Well, thank you for that. We wait with bated breath. Thank you, everybody. Oh, Joe, you're all waiting now, aren't you?
Just say I have to give my apologies. It's the only one that I can't do in the year, but I won't be able to do that because I'll be on holiday the next meeting.
You don't actually need to all ship, but thank you. It's lovely. I know one or two others aren't also able to. Anyone else going to Bournemouth? No? Very nice. Right. Thank you, everybody. I'll close the meeting there.